The world runs on two currencies. One is money, the other is value. And here's what almost nobody tells you. Money is just a delayed reflection of value. It always arrives late. It always arrives distorted. And if you're only watching your bank account, you're watching the wrong scoreboard entirely. There is a small percentage of people who understand this instinctively. They don't chase money directly. They build value relentlessly, and money follows them the way weather follows pressure systems. Not because they demanded it, but because it had nowhere else to go. Everyone else spends their entire life chasing the currency instead of the source, and wonders why the chase never ends. Today we're going to study exactly how the wealthy think differently about value itself, using both Machiavelli's writing on power and leverage, and modern economic psychology on how humans actually assign worth to things, to people, and to themselves. Machiavelli spent his career studying a very specific question. What actually determines whether a ruler holds power, or merely appears to? His conclusion, stated across the prints in different forms, was consistent. Power is never really about what you possess. It's about what others believe they need from you, and what they believe it would cost them to lose access to it. This is not just political theory. It is the exact mechanism behind every negotiation, every salary, every price tag, every business deal that has ever existed. The person who understands this plays an entirely different game than the person who doesn't, even when they're sitting at the exact same table. So let's be honest about why you're watching this. You work hard. You probably work harder than most people you know. And yet you watch people who seem to work less, know less, and risk less, accumulate more than you do, faster than you do, with what looks like less effort. This isn't a coincidence, and it isn't rigged in the way people like to complain about at parties. It's a different operating system entirely, running underneath the one you were taught. You were taught that money follows effort. That's incomplete. Money follows perceived value, and perceived value is a psychological construction, not a physical law. Today we break that construction apart into pieces you can actually use, starting right now. Phase 1. Effort is not the product. Leverage is the product. Here is the sentence that changes how you see money for the rest of your life. Nobody pays you for how hard you worked. They pay you for what they cannot easily get anywhere else. This sounds obvious once it's said out loud, and yet almost nobody actually operates as if they believe it. Most people spend their careers optimizing the wrong variable. They work longer hours, they try harder, they stay later, and they wonder why none of it translates proportionally into income. Because effort was never the variable that mattered. Scarcity of what you provide was always the variable that mattered. Machiavelli understood this about political power specifically. He observed that rulers who made themselves easily replaceable, whose skills or position could be filled by anyone, held power only as long as nobody noticed the substitute sitting right next to them. But rulers who built something genuinely difficult to replicate, an alliance, a skill, a piece of information nobody else had access to, held power that didn't depend on constant proving. The parallel to money is almost exact. If what you offer can be replicated by 10 other people at the same price, your leverage is close to zero, no matter how hard you work at it. If what you offer requires years to replicate, or access nobody else has, your leverage compounds, often while you're doing less active work than you did before. This reframes the entire question of how to make more money. The question isn't how do I work harder? The question is, what am I building that becomes harder to replace over time, not easier? Most jobs, most businesses, most personal brands get easier to replace as time passes, because the market catches up. The wealthy build in the opposite direction. They deliberately choose paths where each year makes them harder to substitute, not easier. A skill that compounds. A reputation that compounds, a network that compounds, relationships built on trust that took years to earn and cannot be rushed by a competitor, no matter how much capital they throw at the problem. Start asking yourself this question about your own work. If I disappeared tomorrow, how quickly and how easily could someone else produce what I produce, at the price I charge? If the honest answer is very easily and very quickly, you have discovered exactly why you're not being paid what you believe you deserve. It has nothing to do with your effort. It has everything to do with your leverage, and leverage is something you can deliberately build, one deliberate choice at a time, starting today. Phase 2. Explaining your price is the tell of someone who doesn't believe in it. Watch how differently two types of people discuss money. One person, asked why they charge what they charge, immediately launches into a justification. They explain their hours, their costs, their struggle, their credentials, sometimes even apologizing before the number leaves their mouth. The other person, asked the same question, simply states the number, occasionally with brief context, and moves on. There is no defensiveness in their voice, because there is no internal negotiation happening. They are not asking permission for the price to exist. This difference is not confidence as a personality trait. It's a direct signal of internal belief about value, and other people read it instantly, usually below conscious awareness. When you over-explain a price, you are broadcasting doubt. You are telling the other party, before they've even had time to object, that there is room to push back, because you yourself are still negotiating with your own justification. Buyers, whether they're clients, employers, or partners, are exceptionally good at detecting this signal, even when they can't name what they're detecting. They sense hesitation the way animals sense fear, and they respond to it the same way predators respond to it. They push exactly where the give is. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the danger of a ruler who felt compelled to justify every decision to those beneath him. He argued that constant explanation erodes authority, because it signals that authority is up for debate. Every justification is an invitation to argue the justification. This applies directly to how you price your time, your work, your product, and yourself. The wealthy rarely over-explain their value, not because they're arrogant, though it can look that way to people used to constant justification, but because they've already done the internal work of believing the number before they said it out loud. The confidence in the delivery is not a trick layered on top. It's the visible symptom of an internal calculation that's already settled. This is trainable, starting immediately. The next time you state a price, a rate, a fee, or an ask, say the number, and then stop talking. Resist the urge to fill the silence that follows. That silence feels unbearable at first, especially if you're used to over-explaining. Sit in it anyway. You will notice something important. The silence does not usually get filled with objection. It gets filled with acceptance, because you didn't hand the other party a script for negotiating you down. You simply stated a fact and let it stand on its own weight. Phase 3. Poor thinking optimizes for now. Wealthy thinking optimizes for compounding. There is a specific psychological trap that keeps people financially stuck regardless of how much they earn, and it has almost nothing to do with income level. It's a time horizon problem. Poor thinking, and this has nothing to do with class or background, evaluates every decision against an immediate question: what does this get me right now? Wealthy thinking evaluates decisions against a different question entirely: what does this compound into over years? This shows up everywhere once you know to look for it. Two people earn the same income. One spends it in ways that feel good immediately, upgrading their lifestyle to match every raise, buying visible status symbols that signal wealth without building it. The other invests the same income into things that feel almost invisible in the short term: skills, relationships, assets, knowledge, and looks, on paper, poorer for years, sometimes for a decade, while actually building the exact leverage discussed in Phase 1. Then, seemingly overnight to outside observers, the gap becomes undeniable, not because anything sudden happened, but because compounding is invisible for a long time and then impossible to ignore. Machiavelli studied this pattern in the rise and fall of empires specifically. He noted that the empires which lasted were rarely the ones that expanded fastest in their first years. They were the ones that built infrastructure, alliances, and internal strength patiently, even when faster, flashier expansion was available and tempting. The ones that grabbed everything immediately available often collapsed within a generation, because they had built size without building the underlying structure to support it. Wealth built the same way, fast and visible, without the underlying compounding infrastructure beneath it, tends to collapse the same way, often quietly, often to the complete surprise of everyone who was impressed by the speed of the rise. This means the actual skill of getting wealthy is not the skill of making money in any given month. It's the discipline of consistently choosing the option that compounds over the option that feels good today, for long enough that the compounding becomes visible. Almost nobody has the patience for this, which is exactly why it works for the people who do. The barrier to wealth was never information. Everyone has access to the same information now. The barrier has always been the willingness to defer the reward long enough for compounding to actually happen, in a culture engineered relentlessly to make you want everything immediately. Phase 4. Access is not the same as value. Understand the difference, or stay confused forever. Here's a distinction almost nobody makes explicitly, and it explains a huge portion of why hard work and income are so poorly correlated. Being accessible to everyone destroys your value. Being valuable to a specific group of people who cannot easily replace what you offer them creates it. These sound similar. They are opposites. Think about why the same skill, the same hour of time, can be worth $10 in one context and $10,000 in another. The skill hasn't changed. What's changed is who has access to it, and how badly that specific person or group needs exactly what you're offering, delivered exactly the way you deliver it. Wealthy operators are relentless about this distinction. They don't try to be valuable to everyone. That's actually a losing strategy, because value to everyone usually means commodity pricing, since everyone can access it easily, and therefore nobody needs to pay a premium for it. Instead, they become extremely valuable to a specific, sometimes small, group of people who have very little alternative access to what's being offered. Machiavelli's writing on alliances captures this precisely. He argued that a ruler's power came not from having many weak allies, but from having a small number of relationships where he held genuine, irreplaceable importance to the other party. Being generally useful to everyone made a ruler forgettable and interchangeable. Being specifically critical to a few made him nearly impossible to remove from power. Translate this directly into how you think about money. Trying to be useful to a broad, general market usually flattens your price down to whatever the least skilled competitor charges. Becoming specifically, irreplaceably useful to a narrow group who cannot easily find your exact combination of skill, reliability, and understanding allows you to set the price, rather than accept the market's default number. This is why specialization consistently outperforms generalization financially, even though generalization feels safer because it seems to keep more doors open. Wide open doors rarely lead anywhere valuable, precisely because everyone else is walking through them too. Narrow, specific expertise, the kind that takes actual time to build and can't be faked, closes off some doors permanently, but opens the ones that actually matter, the ones where you're not competing on price, because you're not competing with anyone at all. Phase 5. The rich negotiate from the position of not needing the deal. Everyone else negotiates from the position of needing it. This might be the single most important psychological difference between how wealth thinks and how scarcity thinks, and it changes literally everything about how a negotiation unfolds before a single word is even exchanged. When you need a deal to happen, that need is detectable, almost always, regardless of how well you think you're hiding it. It shows up in your timing, your tone, your willingness to accept the first counteroffer, the speed of your responses. Dozens of small tells that experienced negotiators read instantly and instinctively. Machiavelli's central insight about fear versus love as tools of control applies here in an unexpected way. He argued that dependence on another party's goodwill was inherently unstable because goodwill could be withdrawn at any time, for any reason, leaving you with nothing to fall back on. The only stable position was one where you retained genuine alternatives, where your well-being didn't hinge entirely on this one relationship, this one deal, this one outcome working out in your favor. Applied to money, this means the actual leverage in any negotiation belongs to whoever has the most credible ability to simply walk away and be fine. This is why wealthy people often seem to negotiate with a kind of detachment that looks almost careless from the outside. It isn't carelessness. It's the direct result of having built genuine alternatives before they ever sat down at the table. They can walk from this specific deal because there are other deals, other clients, other opportunities available to them, and crucially, the other party can sense this, even without being told directly. That sensed alternative changes the entire dynamic of the conversation, often before any numbers are discussed. The uncomfortable truth here is that you cannot fake this position. Pretending you have alternatives when you desperately need this specific deal to close is usually detectable, and even when it isn't, it's a dangerous game because you could actually lose the deal you needed while performing indifference you didn't feel. The actual solution is not a negotiation tactic at all. It's the deeper work from phases 1 through 4, building leverage, building compounding assets, building specific irreplaceable value to more than one potential source of income, so that by the time you're sitting across from any single deal, you genuinely, not performatively, do not need it to survive. That genuine security is what shows up in the room, and it's the single hardest thing on this entire list to build, and the single most valuable. Phase 6. Wealth accumulates in silence and gets destroyed in performance. There's a final piece that ties everything together, and it's the one people find hardest to accept because it goes directly against what social media rewards. Publicly performing wealth and privately building wealth are almost always in direct tension with each other, and most people who are still building genuine financial position instinctively understand this, even if they can't articulate exactly why. Every dollar spent signaling wealth to others is a dollar not compounding toward actually possessing it. This isn't a moral judgment about spending money. It's a simple observation about where the same unit of resource can go and what it produces in each direction. Machiavelli observed something similar about rulers who spent extravagantly to appear powerful. He noted that this spending often accelerated their downfall rather than securing their position, because it drained the actual resources, the treasury, the army, the alliances that would have provided real security, in exchange for an appearance of security that evaporated the moment it was tested. This is exactly why people who are quietly, genuinely wealthy so often don't look like it, while people who look wealthy so often aren't, at least not yet, and sometimes never will be. The performance and the substance draw from the same limited pool of resources and attention, and every dollar or hour spent on one is unavailable to the other. This doesn't mean never enjoying money you've earned. It means understanding clearly which category any given spending falls into, performance or position, and being deliberate rather than automatic about which one you're choosing, especially in the years when your foundation is still being built. Now put all 6 of these together, and you can see why the wealthy genuinely are playing a different game, not a rigged one, not a secret one available only to the already privileged, but a different set of rules that almost nobody explains clearly, because almost nobody who understands it has any incentive to explain it to a wider audience. Leverage over effort, belief over explanation, compounding over immediacy, specific value over broad access, genuine alternatives over performed confidence, silent accumulation over visible performance. None of these require starting capital you don't have. All of them require a shift in how you evaluate every financial decision you make from this point forward. Here is your challenge for the next 7 days. Pick one thing in your financial life, a price you charge, a job you do, a service you provide, and ask honestly how easily it could be replaced by someone else tomorrow. If the answer is very easily, spend this week identifying exactly one specific skill or piece of knowledge that would make you harder to replace a year from now than you are today, and take the first concrete step toward building it. Comment below with what you identified. I read every one, and I want to know what you're building toward. If this way of thinking is useful to you, there's a lot more where this came from. Every week, we take one principle, rooted in historical strategy and modern behavioral economics, and turn it into something you can actually use in your own decisions, not as theory sitting on a shelf, but as a lens you carry into every negotiation, every price you set, and every deal you walk into. Subscribe if you want to keep building this with us. The rich were never playing the same game as everyone else. Now you know the rules. What you do with them from here is entirely up to you.